The phone rang at 3:17 in the morning. I know the exact time because I've been lying awake anyway, the way I do most nights now, listening to the house settle around me. When you've lived alone for 4 years, you learn the sounds of your own home like a second heartbeat. The creak of the third step on the staircase, the way the kitchen pipes knock twice before the water runs hot, the silence that comes just before dawn, that particular kind of quiet that feels like the whole world is holding its breath. So when my phone lit up the nightstand, I was already half sitting up before the second ring. It was my son. I almost didn't answer, not because I didn't love him. I did fiercely, the way only a mother who has raised a child alone can love, but because nothing good has ever come from a phone call at 3 a.m. You learn that at 63, you learn a lot of things at 63 that you wish someone had told you at 35. I answered, "Mom." His voice was tight, controlled in that way that meant he was trying very hard not to sound desperate. I recognized it immediately. I'd heard it the first time he wrecked a car at 19, heard it again when his first business venture collapsed at 28. My son has always been a man who tries to sound like he has everything under control, right up until the moment he absolutely does not. "It's the middle of the night, Reginald." "I know, Mum, listen." A pause. I could hear something in the background, a woman's voice, sharp and low. His wife. "My card got declined. At the resort. They're saying we owe $11,000, and if we don't pay by checkout tomorrow morning, they're going to call the police and have us detained." I sat there in the dark for a moment. $11,000. A resort. "Reginald," I said slowly. "Where are you?" "Scottsdale." "We came out for the weekend. It was supposed to be." He lowered his voice. "It was Felicia's birthday. She wanted the full package, the suite, the spa treatments, and your card was declined. The balance transfer didn't go through the way I thought it would. Mum, I just need you to wire $11,000 to the hotel account tonight. I'll pay you back by the end of the month, I swear to you. $11,000, wire transfer, tonight." I thought about the last time I had wired money to my son, 3 years ago when he said he needed $4,000 to cover a gap in his mortgage payment. He had paid that back, eventually, 8 months later, and only after I stopped taking his calls for 2 weeks. Before that, it was $1,500 for car repairs. Before that, it was $800 for something I can no longer remember and probably never should have given in the first place. "Call Felicia's parents," I said. Silence. "Mom." "You heard me. Call her parents. Good night, Reginald." I hung up the phone and set it face down on the nightstand. Then I lay back against my pillow and stared at the ceiling and waited for my heart to stop hammering. It rang again in 40 seconds. I watched it light up, watched his name glow in the dark, and I did not answer. It rang again at 3:31, again at 3:44. Then a text, "Mom, please, this is serious. They said they'll press charges." Then another, "I can't reach Felicia's parents. Please." Then at 4:02 in the morning, one that simply said, "Fine." I knew what that fine meant. It meant he was furious. It meant I would hear about this. It meant there would be consequences I hadn't fully mapped out yet. I fell asleep anyway. I need to back up. Because none of this makes sense without the context, and the context is the part that took me nearly 3 years to fully understand. My name is Joanne. I am 63 years old. I live in a 4-bedroom house in Decatur, Georgia, that I have owned outright since 2019, when I used my late husband's life insurance and 22 years of my own careful saving to pay off the remaining mortgage in one lump sum. The day I made that payment, I sat in my car in the credit union parking lot and cried for 15 minutes straight. not from sadness. From something that felt like finally being able to breathe all the way down to the bottom of my lungs. I raised Reginald mostly on my own. His father, Gerald, was present but not exactly there. You know the kind of man I mean. Physically in the house, emotionally somewhere else, working long hours and spending what was left of himself on hobbies and friends, and a general sense that the domestic world was not his department. Gerald died of a heart attack in 2015. I grieved him honestly, buried him properly, and then I got very quiet and very intentional about the rest of my life. I had worked as a hospital administrator for 31 years. I had a pension. I had a 401k that I had contributed to faithfully since I was 29 years old. I had the house. I had my health. I had friends, real ones, the kind you can call at 7 a.m. because something is wrong, not just the kind who like your photos online. What I had built slowly, carefully, the way you build anything that's meant to last. Reginald knew this. He had watched me build it, and somewhere along the way, I am still not entirely certain when, he had decided that what I had built was also his. He met Felicia at a company conference in Atlanta 4 years ago. She was in sales for a pharmaceutical company, charming in the way that certain people are charming. Immediately, completely, and in a way that makes you wonder, later, if you ever actually saw the real person at all. She was 34 to his 38. She had perfect nails and a laugh that filled a room and opinions about everything from interior design to where children should go to school. Delivered with the absolute confidence of someone who had never once been seriously wrong about anything. I liked her. I want to be honest about that. I liked her in the beginning. They got engaged after 10 months. The wedding was in September at a venue outside of Savannah that cost, I know because Reginald told me, beaming, as though this was something to be proud of, $47,000. Felicia wore a dress that she mentioned, twice during the reception, had cost $9,000. I remember standing near the appetizer table and doing quiet math in my head and thinking, they have not mentioned where they're going to live. I found out 3 weeks before the wedding when Reginald called to ask if it would be okay for them to stay with me temporarily while they looked for a house. I said yes. That is the thing I would take back, if I could take back anything. Not the money I eventually gave, not the argument I didn't have when I should have, just that one word, spoken too quickly, without conditions, without a timeline, without any of the things I would tell every woman I know to demand before opening her door to someone else's idea of temporary. Yes, they moved in on a Thursday in late October, with 11 boxes, 4 suitcases, a coffee maker that Felicia called better than anything you currently have, and a dog I had not been informed about. The dog was a large, exuberant golden doodle, named something I can no longer bring myself to write. He destroyed one of my dining room chairs within the first week. I told myself it was fine, it was temporary. By Christmas they had rearranged my living room furniture. Felicia explained that the old layout didn't flow correctly, and she'd seen this done on a design show, and honestly didn't I think it was better. I stood in my own living room and looked at my grandmother's armchair, pushed against a wall it had never touched in 30 years, and I said, "Sure, if that's what you prefer." By February, Felicia had cleaned out 2 of my kitchen cabinets to make room for supplements and specialty coffee pods, and a bread maker that was used exactly once. She had also begun making comments about my cooking, not mean ones precisely, but the kind of comments that carry a particular weight. "Oh, Joanne, do you always add this much salt? Have you ever tried making that with almond milk instead? I've been reading about seed oils and honestly we should probably switch." Reginald said nothing. He sat at my kitchen table, eating my food and watching his phone and saying nothing. I told myself, they are saving money to buy a house. This is what it looks like. This is temporary. By April, Felicia had taken it upon herself to redecorate the guest bathroom, the one they used, with items she purchased without asking. She replaced my towels. She added a shelf I had not approved. She brought in a diffuser that made the whole hallway smell like eucalyptus and something else I couldn't identify. And when I mentioned that the smell gave me headaches, she looked at me with an expression of such patient concern that I felt like I was the unreasonable one. I started keeping a notebook. I don't know exactly what made me start. Instinct, probably, or some quiet voice in the back of my head that had been trying to get my attention for months. I wrote down dates and incidents, not obsessively, just carefully, the way you document things when you understand, somewhere beneath your conscious thought, that you will eventually need to be able to prove them. March 4th, F told Reginald that the photos on the mantel were depressing the energy of the space and suggested I consider putting them in storage. RF said nothing. March 19, F used my credit card to order something online, said she assumed it was fine and would pay me back. $67. Has not paid me back. April 6th, F told her friend on the phone I was in the next room, that she basically runs the house, and that I am sweet but kind of a pushover. That last one I read back 3 times. Kind of a pushover. I closed the notebook and sat very still at my kitchen table, and I thought about who I had been for 31 years at that hospital. I thought about the administrators I had managed, the crises I had handled, the budget negotiations I had won, the doctors who had tried to dismiss me in meetings and learned, over time, that it was not a strategy that worked. I thought about the woman who had paid off a house by herself, who had raised a child mostly by herself, who had built a life from scratch after her husband died and done it without asking anyone for a single thing. Kind of a pushover. She had mistaken my patience for weakness. I have found, in 63 years, that this is a mistake people only make once. The 8 months that followed were a slow education in what I had allowed into my home and what it was costing me, not just financially, though the financial piece was significant and I tracked every dollar, but in terms of space, energy, sleep, and the quiet sense of safety that a person is supposed to feel in their own home. Felicia began having friends over without asking, first occasionally, then regularly. My living room would fill with people I didn't know, eating food I hadn't been consulted about, leaving glasses on my coffee table without coasters, staying until 11 or midnight on weeknights. When I finally said something, carefully, kindly, with every intention of being reasonable, Felicia looked at Reginald, and Reginald looked at the floor, and then Felicia said, "We thought you liked having people around. You always seem lonely." I seemed lonely. I was 62 years old. I had a book club, a church community, 3 close friends I saw every week, a garden I tended with genuine devotion, and a rich inner life that I had spent decades cultivating. I was not lonely. I was simply quiet in the way that people are quiet when they are comfortable with themselves, and my daughter-in-law had confused that quietness with need. Reginald said nothing. The money request started that summer. First it was small things, framed casually. Could I cover the groceries this week? They were a little short. Could I float them for the electricity bill? Reginald's paycheck was late clearing. Could I lend them $500 for a car repair? They'd get it back to me the following Friday. I said yes, more than I should have. I always said I'd make note of it. I always told myself it would be the last time. Then, in September, Reginald sat down across from me at the kitchen table. The first time in months he had spoken to me without Felicia present, and told me he needed $8,000. I put down my coffee cup. $8,000, I said. It's an investment opportunity. My buddy Deshawn has a Reginald. Mum, it's legitimate. He's done this twice before, and I'm not giving you $8,000 for an investment opportunity from Deshawn. He sat back, and then something shifted in his face, something I hadn't seen before, or hadn't let myself see, a kind of coldness I didn't recognize in the boy I had raised. You know, he said, this house is going to be mine eventually anyway. I looked at him for a long time. Is that right? I said. I'm just saying. We're your family. Felicia and I are trying to build something, and we need. This conversation is over. I picked up my coffee. I'd like you to think very carefully about what you just said to me, and then I'd like you to think about whether you want to say anything like that again. He left the table. I sat there alone, and I thought about my grandmother's armchair against a wall it had never touched in 30 years, and the notebook in my bedroom drawer with 14 months of careful documentation, and the way my son had just told me, in the most civil terms possible, that he was waiting for me to die. That afternoon I called my attorney. Her name is Sandra, and she has been my attorney since Gerald's estate, and she is one of those women you want in your corner when everything goes sideways. I told her everything. She listened without interrupting, which is one of the things I have always appreciated about Sandra. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Joanne, she said, I want you to know that you have more options here than you think you do. We talked for 2 hours. I left her office with a plan and a list of things to do. In order, quietly, without anyone in my house knowing I was doing them, over the following 6 weeks I updated my will. I updated the beneficiaries on every financial account I held. I moved a significant portion of my savings into an account Reginald did not know existed at a credit union across town. I had Sandra draft a formal letter of residence, not a lease but a legal document establishing the terms under which Reginald and Felicia were guests in my home, including a move-out provision that required 60 days' notice from me, and that was absolutely Baton, entirely within my legal right as the sole owner of this property. I did not tell them any of this. I went on making dinner. I went on being pleasant. I went on writing in my notebook. October 14, F. told a neighbor, Mrs. Hatchins, who told me directly that she and Reginald were basically supporting me, and that I couldn't really manage the house on my own anymore. I'm 62 years old, and I ran a department of 47 people. I manage fine. November 3, R. asked again about investing together. I said I'd think about it. I will not think about it. November 28th, Thanksgiving. F. took over my kitchen entirely, rearranged my serving dishes, and told the assembled family that she basically cooked everything. I made the cornbread, the sweet potato pie, and the turkey brine, but I did not correct her. I was watching something. December 9, F.R.ish, brought up in front of company that I forget things sometimes. I've never forgotten anything. She is establishing a narrative. That last entry I read back and felt something settle into place. A cold, clear recognition. This wasn't carelessness. It wasn't thoughtlessness. It was a campaign, patient and deliberate, to reframe who I was in my own home, to make me seem diminished, to position themselves as caretakers of a woman who, in their telling, needed caretaking. I thought about that word again. Pushover. I called Sandra the next morning. January came cold and grey. and I was ready. I sat Reginald down on a Tuesday evening while Felicia was at a yoga class. I placed Sandra's document on the table between us. I told him I needed him to read it carefully. He picked it up. I watched his face as he read. "What is this?" he said, though it was not really a question. "It's a formal residency agreement. You and Felicia have been living here for 15 months. I love you, and this has never been a permanent arrangement. The agreement outlines a move-out date of April 1st, 60 days from now." He put the paper down. "Mom," his voice had that tight, controlled quality again, "we can't afford to we don't have—" "You've had 15 months," I said. "I've covered or partially covered your grocery bills, your car repairs, 2 credit card minimums, and a number of miscellaneous expenses I won't detail right now, but that I have detailed in my records. You've had 15 months of reduced expenses, and you have not saved. I know this because I pay attention, Reginald. I always have." He stared at me. "You need to have a serious conversation with your wife about your financial situation. You need to make a real plan. And you need to understand that this house is my house. It will be mine for as long as I am living in it. What happens after that is up to me, and it will be determined by the choices you make going forward. Am I being clear?" He was quiet for a long time. "Felicia's not going to like this," he finally said. "I imagine she's not. That's not my concern." Felicia did not, in fact, like it. She came home from yoga to find Reginald sitting at the kitchen table, looking like he'd been told the world was ending, and the next 3 hours were among the more unpleasant of my recent memory. She cried. She accused me of ambushing them. She said she had sacrificed her own housing opportunities to be here for me. She said, and this is the part I will never forget, that I should be grateful to have young people in the house, that I didn't understand how lucky I was. Grateful. I sat at my own kitchen table and I let her finish, and when she was done, I looked at her very steadily and I said, "The document stands, April 1st. Then I stood up, said good night, and went to bed, which brings me back to 3017 in the morning 6 weeks later, and a phone call from Scottsdale, Arizona. What I didn't tell Reginald that night, what I had no obligation to tell him, was that I already knew about the trip. Mrs. Hutchins had seen Felicia loading luggage into an Uber 2 days before, and I knew, because I had looked at the credit card statement I still received for an account we had been sharing for household expenses, an account I had quietly closed 2 weeks prior, that Felicia had attempted to charge approximately $11,000 to that card for a resort package before, realizing at checkout that the card was no longer active. She had planned to charge $11,000 of a luxury Scottsdale resort stay to my household account. Without asking, without a word, the morning after the 3 a.m. call at approximately 9:15, I received a call from a Scottsdale area code. It was a police officer conducting a courtesy wellness check. He was very polite. He confirmed that there had been a dispute at the resort over an unpaid bill, that no criminal charges had been filed, and that the matter had been resolved, which I gathered meant Felicia had finally called her own parents. I thanked the officer. I hung up. I made myself a cup of coffee, and I sat in my garden, and I listened to a cardinal singing in the big oak tree, and I thought, this is over now. Reginald and Felicia moved out on March 28th, 4 days ahead of schedule. They did not say goodbye exactly. Reginald hugged me in the doorway, stiffly, briefly, and told me he needed some time. I told him I understood. I told him I loved him. I told him the door would be open when he was ready to walk back through it like a grown man. He nodded and left. I closed the door. I stood in my front hall for a moment in the quiet, and then I walked through every room of my house, and I straightened things and opened windows, and I put my grandmother's armchair back where it had always been. It took me about 20 minutes. Then I sat down in that chair, and I called my friend Charlene, who had been telling me for 14 months that I needed to handle this, and I said, "It's done." She screamed so loud I had to hold the phone away from my ear. People asked me sometimes, friends, women at church, my book club, what I would have done differently. And I always tell them the truth. I wouldn't have said yes so quickly. I would have said 60 days. If you need housing, I will give you 60 days, and these are the conditions, in writing, signed by both of you. I would have treated it like the business arrangement it was, instead of letting love make me think that love was enough to hold it together. I would have trusted the voice in my head that spoke up the day Felicia said the layout didn't flow correctly. That voice knew. I just wasn't ready to listen. I would have remembered sooner that generosity without boundaries isn't generosity. It's just a slow way of losing yourself. Reginald called me in June. We talked for 2 hours, the longest real conversation we had had in years. He cried. I cried. He told me that some of what Felicia had said about me over those 15 months had been wrong, and that he had known it was wrong and said nothing, and that was the part that still keeps him up at night. I told him I knew. I told him I needed him to be a man who speaks up, not a man who watches and says nothing. He said he was working on it. I believe him. I choose to believe him. Not because I am naive. I have not been naive in a very long time, but because he is my son, and I know who he is underneath the choices he made. And I know that who you are underneath is still who you have the chance to become. Felicia and I have not spoken. I don't expect we will any time soon. That is fine. Not every relationship is worth saving, and there is no rule that says a woman must make peace with someone who looked at her carefully built life and saw only something to take. My house is quiet now. The cardinal is back in the oak tree. My grandmother's chair is where it belongs. I sleep through the night most nights. And when I don't, I lie in the dark and listen to the house settle, and I feel, in the deepest part of me, at home. I am 63 years old. I built this life with my own hands and my own choices, and 31 years of getting up and going to work and coming home and doing it again. Nobody is waiting for me to need them. Nobody is counting what I have. And if my phone rings at 3 a.m., I already know what I'm going to say. Call someone who owes you something. I don't. People always want to know if I regret any of it. The patience I showed for those 15 months. The money I gave before I stopped giving. The single word, yes, that opened my door to all of it in the first place. I've thought about that a long time. And what I've come to understand is that regret is only useful if you actually learn something from it. And what I learned is this: the way you allow people to treat you in the beginning is the agreement you make with them about how things will go. I didn't know that when I said yes. I thought love was its own kind of contract. I thought because Reginald was my son, and because I was his mother, the natural order of that relationship would protect us both. It didn't. It couldn't. Because love without clear terms is just an open door, and not everyone who walks through an open door intends to respect the house. Felicia didn't walk into my home intending to dismantle it. I believe that, actually. I think she walked in and saw a woman living quietly and alone, and made a series of assumptions, that the quiet meant emptiness, that the aloneness meant loneliness, that the patience meant there was no spine underneath it. Every time I said yes when I meant something else, I confirmed her assumptions. Every time I moved aside in my own kitchen, in my own living room, in my own life, I handed her a little more of the narrative. That's not her fault entirely. That's mine. I handed it over. Slowly, politely, with a smile, I handed it over. What saved me wasn't anger. I want to be clear about that. Anger would have made me reactive. It would have made me loud at the wrong moments and silent at the right ones. What saved me was the notebook. What saved me was Sandra's office and 2 hours of honest conversation about what I had actually built and what I actually had the right to protect. What saved me was the moment I stopped waiting for Reginald to become the son I needed him to be and started acting on the situation as it actually was. That's the hardest thing, I think. Accepting what is actually in front of you instead of the version you love. I loved the version of my son who was 12 years old and made me a card on Mother's Day with his own 2 hands. I loved the version who called me from his first apartment just to hear my voice. Loving those versions made it harder to see the version sitting across from me at my kitchen table, telling me that my house was going to be his eventually anyway. But I saw it, and once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. That's how integrity works. Once you know what you know, you are responsible for it. Reginald is finding his way back. It's slow. It should be slow. Trust, once it shows you its underside, doesn't simply flip back over because the moment has passed. But I watch him and I see the work he is doing, and I choose to believe it, not blindly, with my eyes open and my notebook put away, because I no longer need it. Some chapters you close not because they didn't matter, but because you finally understand what they were for. I am 63 years old. I sleep through the night now. My grandmother's chair is back where it belongs. And every morning when I sit in it, I think, this is what it costs to know yourself. Sometimes it costs you months of discomfort, and a son who needs time, and a daughter-in-law who still hasn't called. Sometimes it costs you the version of the story you wanted to be living. But what you get in return is the actual story, the true one. The one where you are, the woman who built the house, kept the house, and knew exactly what it was worth. That woman was always here. I just had to remember her.